This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
Change can often seem like a dream, framed by moments when individuals step into the spotlight, determined to ignite transformation. And when those individuals step up, sometimes from very unlikely places, we can see just how weak the system is that needs to be reformed. And we question why we haven't been angry that it wasn't changed sooner, or by anyone else. Today my guest is a politician who has been fearlessly enabling change around disability reform in a space where others just did not see this as a priority. My guest is a remarkable advocate for change, but has had to work even harder than most to be taken seriously. My guest is not just a Kenyan Senator nominated to Parliament by the Orange Democratic Movement Party. She's a symbol of resilience and determination to many Kenyan people. Losing her sight to glaucoma in her early 20s while studying in the UK, she found out the hard way that systemic inaccessibility was going to do more damage to her quality of life, her career and livelihood than the blindness itself. My guest, most importantly, is an award-winning singer-songwriter. Her music is a fusion of Afro-soul, Afro-pop and funk. She has an eclectic and zealous fan base, whether for her acoustic shows or the dynamic Kemi Kemi live performances. Her music is a powerful force. But if she didn't fight hard, she would have lost it all. Her advocacy knows no bounds, as she now represents people with disabilities, women, children and young people, all while breaking down the pervasive stigmas still associated with disability, not only in Africa, but across the world. She was a keynote speaker at the One Young World Summit in 2023, an event that the Possibility Club podcast went to, and you're going to hear us cover in some special episodes very soon. From pop star to University of Bristol student to Kenyan State Senator, her professional journey has seen her work with industry giants like the BBC and Disney. And now she's creating a tidal shift in the world of accessibility through her progressive politics. I'm Richard Freeman. This is the Possibility Club. And I invite you to join me in having a chat with the remarkable Crystal Asige. This is the Possibility Club. Hello, 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 and it's Richard Freeman. This is being recorded in June. It is very sunny here on the UK south coast by the beach. And as always, I am exploring change. I'm exploring bravery, what the world looks like through the lens of those that are rolling their sleeves up and trying to change it bit by bit. And this episode is no different. But I'm very, very delighted to be joined by a very special guest all the way from Kenya. She is a remarkable ambassador for disability rights. She is a singer-songwriter. She is a politician, and she is setting the world alight with all sorts of different examples of creativity and courage, and we're going to explore that. So my guest this week is Crystal Asige. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Thank you, Richard. I'm doing okay. I guess post-pandemic, like everybody else, trying to be a bit more aware of how you're feeling or how I'm feeling, in the moment. Mm-hmm. And right this moment, I feel all right. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I hope by the end of this conversation, you're feeling the same or better and not worse. That's my job to tell me a little bit about your sort of early life and what it is that you maybe wanted to do when you were growing up.
So I grew up on an island off the coast of Kenya called Mombasa. It's my hometown, or my home island. And I am I'm the fourth child, so I'm the last child. I have one sister and two brothers, and my parents are also still living in Mombasa, but the kids are sort of now everywhere. But when I was growing up in Mombasa, I think I had a regular childhood. Of course, everyone has different perspectives of what regular looks like, depending on the context. But for me, I was a super bubbly child. I used to be called the smiling princess because was always smiling. I was very much of a tomboy. I think I still am. And I was super interested in storytelling when I was a kid. I was fascinated by people who are very expressive, whether that's be through their clothing or through how they spoke, or how they expressed themselves in other ways. And I just wanted to be that kind of person who was able to tell stories in different ways. So performing arts was a big part of my childhood as well as music. And everything about just being on stage and speaking, debating, poetry, acting, all of it. I was very much engrossed in it. And there was one teacher in class 1 who really pulled that out of me. Her name is Liz Jadav. And I still talk about her today and to her today about how her ability or her freedom to be the gypsy-like, bob haircut, driving a yellow Beetle around Mombasa Island. She was just super inspirational. And I was like, man, I wish I could just be as free as her with her guitar thrown across her back, just walking around, always smiling. And I think that is sort of like a summary of how I grew up, very much open, interested in telling stories, and a parallel as well to a family which, Kenyan or rather African family, which was very much like, do what you're supposed to do, very disciplinarian. This is where you're supposed to, from this, you go to that, from that, you go to the next. And there isn't really any gray in the middle. Those are the sort of like two realities I was living through when I was a kid.
Those two realities, they are sort of polar, aren't they? And do you find for those people, where perhaps that rubs up against, people who are naturally, as you've described, really expressive, sort of have an individual spirit, just naturally stand out, regardless they were kind of born to, in that very traditional family, disciplined hierarchy. Are there many people that you came across when you were growing up like that, or did you feel sort of a little bit on your own? Is that tension common, or do most people sort of just toe the line?
Yeah, I think more people in my context in Mombasa towed the line for sure, because of the culture, the traditions, the tribe that you're from, what people expect of you around you. And I remember when I was between maybe 2 and 6, 7, I had a neighbor, they were Dutch. So they had moved from Netherlands to live in Mombasa, and the mum was working in an NGO. So she moved her family out, and they happened to be our neighbors. And I had a really great relationship with their last born son, Casper. So Casper and I were like the black and white boy and girl who was always holding hands, walking down the street. We did everything together. We even used to go to the loo together. We used to do absolutely everything together. And I think everyone around us was like, why is that little black girl and that little white boy always together? And they don't really see anything strange about their friendship, and their parents, their families as well, don't put that on them. But I think that it's a balance, I suppose. It was good that I had this one way where I felt I had Casper and my teacher who let me be me and let me be me around them. But then also the other side, which was more like, okay, do what you're told. I mean, it's difficult for any adolescent, any child growing into adolescence to find themselves. And I don't think it was easy. I think because as well of the race thing and different. I ended up going to a British system school. I ended up moving into one, so there were lots of European kids, etc., and teachers. So I was able to live on both sides of that coin, which was interesting, and perhaps that's what influenced me to then become who I am today, because I'm not the kind of person who's scared to be around difference or scared to speak out if I feel like it, because I've already been able to, experience and live a life where I was able to do both, one way or the other.
So let's talk a little bit about then that ability to kind of step, fearlessly into that space. So you talked there about, some of the race angles and some of the cultural angles and in these sort of different worlds coming together. But then it was in your 20s, I believe, that you started to develop glaucoma, and then that presented a different reality to you that you needed to deal with and understand the implications of that. Talk me about what impact that had on your life at that time.
It was really hard. It was very, very difficult because, first of all, glaucoma isn't something that I ever knew about before I was told I had it. Same with my parents and my wider family. So it was hard to get what it was and its implications, fully, like what it will mean for me in my life moving forward. And then also, I already had plans for myself. I was like, okay, I've been to the UK and I've studied film and theatre, and this is what I want to do. I want to become maybe a sports journalist, or I want to, be an actress, or, all these things that I had in my head, all of which, generally need eyesight, being able to see. It would be nice. So when I was confronted or given the news that this is what you have and this is what it's going to mean, I struggled for sure. I remember I was in my second year of university. And so I didn't have my family around me. They were all back at home. Or my siblings were studying in other universities. So I had to go through that alone, which was quite dark, pretty painful. And I blame myself a lot. I think I already have just general trauma from my childhood around like shame wounds and, this is your fault and you could have done something to prevent this, et cetera, et cetera. So those sort of played in my mind a lot. And so I spiraled into, doing the wrong things with the wrong people during university so I can sort of escape from the reality of, hey, Crystal, you're going to go blind and there's nothing you can do about it. But once I was able to, I guess, accept help from my family in terms of emotional support, then it got a little bit better, but it was still difficult because nobody can say, hey, let me share your pain with you. Let me, cut it into half and carry some as well so that it doesn't feel so heavy. So as much as they were there physically for me, emotionally for me, it was still very much a solo journey. Sure. And I'm still going through it. But it was able to, again, I suppose this is a reoccurring theme in my life, the whole black and white, the whole two sides of the same coin, because I wasn't born without sight, but I'm now able to say, hey, I've been able to live with, and now I'm living without. And these are the differences that I see. And this is how I'm using those lessons to move forward.
And that's a really incredible, powerful thing that you mentioned there. There are many people born with visual impairment or are diagnosed at birth that they're never going to have the sight that others might have. But you lived a couple of decades without that ever being something to even remotely consider. So as you say, you've experienced life with full sight, and then having to completely readjust who you are and how you view the world without it. I can imagine what that must feel like, but that must, past the pain, give you an immense insight into what the world is for people who have profound visual impairment. Your views on it and your understanding, because you've experienced both, must be incredibly powerful and useful in a bigger picture sense. Obviously your personal pain is very clear and completely understandable, but that I imagine there are many people with lots of questions for you. Do you find that?
Yeah, loads of questions all the time. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of saying the same thing over and over again. How can I educate everyone and still make it okay for them to continue asking questions? Because I was going through it, real time. It's not something that I was like, okay, I figured it out and now I'm able to explain to everyone. It was very much like, okay, I'm going through it myself. So when I get it, I'll let you know how this feels or how,
Yeah, but, an accidental expert, not something you asked for. Suddenly everybody.
Exactly. But it definitely gave me a whole new perspective for sure in terms of, what does compassion really mean? Mm-hmm. What does trusting somebody really mean? What does loving someone really mean? What does listening really entail? Very introspective things that I went through and I'm still going through, and I love it. I think in those formative years of the glaucoma, I became like 20 years older in about 2 years in terms of experience and worldviews and belief systems. So I was able to gain perspective, but then also realized that, hey, I really don't know that much. And I really have to learn so much more, unlearn stuff, and then start to relearn so much more, because I'm a beginner now. I've started again in all, in all ways. I've got an opportunity to start again in terms of what I believe, what I see, what I, experience, what I think, all that. And then it also made me realize, of course, hey, this is how people are living. What is disability about? How are people able to sort of navigate through it, especially in my context of Africa, of Kenya, etc. Because when I was in England, the disability was A, at its beginning stages, but B, I was in an environment where people understood disability far more than in Africa, and they supported disability. And there were organizations, there were hospital counselors, there were the city council that would support, all these things. But when I came home, it was almost like a culture shock of, whoa, no one gets it here. So what does it mean for me, and how can I contribute in this new context?
I mean, I think you're being very generous to England and the UK there. I mean, for sure, disability is much better understood now, and people are supported arguably better than maybe 30, 40 years ago. But there's still a very, very long way to go. But in Kenya, it sounds like even further. Then, what did you have to do in order to be able to deal with all of that in your head? What an incredible sort of analogy there, saying you had to grow up 20 years, and in 2 years you must have had as many questions for the world as the world had for you. Where did you put that? What was your outlet, especially when you went back home?
Oh, that's a good question. I started to realize that eventually I realized that I was my own outlet, and because I'm one of one, my own answers, or the answers to my own questions, probably were inside of me, and I would only find them in me because my experience is extremely unique. I've been able to live several lives, in one, and like I say, see and understand things in way differently than I would have if I, continued as a fully sighted person who became a sports journalist, for example. Mm-hmm. So my outlets are many. I think I'm very lucky to be able to have grown up or have talents and giftings and desires in myself that are quite varied. So I love writing music and performing it and getting on stage. And also I really enjoy telling stories and writing short stories, being creative that way. I also love swimming. So being on the beach is everything to me. And the list goes on. And now I'm in a space where my outlet is politics and being in parliament and being able to speak for people who can't speak for themselves. And it's interesting. I was saying to my doctor a little while back, I was like, hey, you know what, doc, if someone told me that this glaucoma was going to catapult me one day somehow because I'm still a huge advocate for disability rights, I would now become a voice for disability rights in the highest platform possible in my country. If someone told me that, I'd have been like, nah, don't you lie, yo. That's crazy. I'm not going to be in parliament one day talking about this stuff. But then now I am. And if someone told me that, hey, your love for being on stage and performing arts and speaking and expressing ideas and storytelling, actually that will catapult you into becoming really articulate when you do get to parliament one day and you have to tell these stories about people who are not really seen and who are invisible in society, you have to tell those stories. So here's a bit of practice for you so that in 20 years' time or whatever, you'll be ready. You would have to start, oh my gosh, public speaking is really a big issue for me. All those things that maybe, make us feel like imposters when we get to a position. So it's interesting that everything has sort of worked together in a very strange way.
This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible. But who are we?
Always Possible works with ambitious businesses, charities, and public services that are thinking about what's next.
From architects to aerospace companies, puppet theatres to primary schools, business networks to big data analysts.
If you're wanting to be brave with some big decisions or to be clearer about what to prioritise, then an award-winning workshop from the Always Possible team is a brilliant starting point.
We care about just one thing: building ideas that work.
For creative, intuitive, and practical expertise, consider Always Possible as your strategic partner. Find out more about how we could power up your mission. Visit alwayspossible.co.uk.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
You know, that journey to politics is a very interesting one, I think, and there are a lot of circumstances where very inherently creative people have gone into politics and have found it unbearable, you know, because it's the politics itself. You've got to navigate, you've got to compromise, you've got to negotiate, there's lots of constitutional things to get your heads around. You know, you're not one of one anymore. You're representing thousands and thousands of people. But what's your experience been of that, or have you found that your inherent sort of creativity has actually is what's got you through?
I would say it's very difficult to adjust now to this space of politics and legislation and representation, like you say, of hundreds of thousands of people. Actually, Richard, this is the first interview that I'm doing since becoming a senator because of that very thing. Yeah, because the whole, I don't know what I'll tell someone. I'm still trying to go through it. I'm still trying to understand it. I'm still trying to break through my own insecurities in this space because it's not anything I'm comfortable with or I have known before. And there are people who have been in this space for, 10 years, 20 years, they've been lawyers for, decades, and they understand all these things. But here I am, this creative, walking into the space. And so I need to understand who I'm becoming or who I am being asked to be in this stage of my life, in this season. So I'm going to just sort of hang tight and learn and unlearn and relearn, try to find ways to be myself, but within these boundaries, which is funny because I don't really, like you say, like very many other creators, we don't really like boundaries. We're the kind of people who, boundaries kill the spirit. Something practical that I'm doing right now actually is one day a week, I am spending it being creative. I'll be in studio. I don't care if the entire house is burning down. It doesn't matter how many phone calls I'm getting. I'm like, no, this is now my time to be creative. I'm going to be in studio. I'm going to sit in a songwriting room. I'm going to hang out with friends who are creative in one way or the other because I need to carve out that for myself to stay sane and to stay, in my purpose. But within Senate, I am slowly sort of, chipping away from my colleagues, basically, who are very, how do I say, not one track minded, but they're very linear in their thinking. And I'm challenging that within my own little ways. And I think it's proving to be wow, they're sort of getting it. They're coming around. It's not changing their entire world or their entire perspective or, how they do things. But okay, there's this girl called Senator Asige, and she taught me something yesterday about 1, 2, 3, and it's almost like I speak to them in lyrics. I give them these ideas, in a very poetic way, and they're like, we never thought about that. Oh, okay, interesting. So I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I'm where I'm supposed to be at, and just trying to figure it out as I go.
Well, thank goodness you are, and I'm sure your self-awareness is actually quite refreshing. There's a lot of politicians that don't do that.
Yeah, I think with that, just before you go to the next, is that I am understanding more and more that it's very important to let yourself be all of you. Mm-hmm. And just because I'm an artist doesn't mean that I pack it up now that I'm in politics. Just because now I'm in politics doesn't mean that I pack up the activist in me, the one who's in the street, yelling. Respectability politics should not hinder me from being all parts of who I am or who I'm created to be, because they're all supposed to assist in the change that I'm trying to make. If the universe wanted me to be, I would have just been a politician, and that would have been my dream from 6 years old, but that's not the way my life has been built or designed. I've gone through all these experiences so that I can now use them all in this time. So I do try my best, not that I get it perfect, but I'm trying to be able to bring everything to the table.
I profess my, ignorance. I don't know a lot about how, Kenyan democracy works in the legislature and the Senate. I imagine a lot of my listeners don't either. So, can you talk me through what the role of a senator and what sort of, what's the sort of political life? What's the influence that you have?
Comparatively, I think that Senate in Kenya is like House of Lords in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my role as a senator is to write legislation. It's about oversighting the National Assembly, who are like members of parliament, basically, in the UK, to oversight what they're doing with monies that have been allocated to them, projects that they're supposed to be leading. And then, of course, my other role is representation. So because I have come into Senate with a particular mandate, which is special interest groups that includes women, youth, and persons with disabilities, then that is the group that I am primarily here to represent. So oversight, legislation, and representation are my three roles. Unlike the UK, though, we have a 5-year term. That's the political term for all levels, whether that's presidency all the way down to like a member of parliament. So I have now about 4 years to go because I got sworn in October 2022. Mm-hmm. So far I've been writing, drafting bills around persons with disabilities. I have a Kenya Sign Language bill that I'm working on. I also have learners with disabilities that has just gone through its second reading, which is very exciting. I'm also trying to amend laws around roads and road safety to include persons with disabilities and what we need when we are, interacting with the built environment, interacting with public transport and things like that, because that is not something that has been understood at all or has been looked into. So me trying to convince ministers of roads and ministers of lands and planning about, hey, you need to think about universal design because this is how it affects persons with disabilities, not just physically, but it affects then how the opportunities of our lives are either coming to us or being denied from us. For example, if a university campus is not universally designed, that means that I would not be able to get a degree, which means that I wouldn't be able to get a job, which means that I wouldn't be able to comfortably or confidently raise a family, which means I won't get a pen. There's so many which means in that
the
journey.
Butterfly effect, isn't it? People think these things in isolation aren't a big deal, but actually it's huge, isn't it?
Exactly. And the same thing with public transport. If I can't get from my front door to wherever it is I'm trying to go, then it affects me in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ways. And I don't think people have really understood that, especially in Kenya. That's what I've been finding. And so trying to educate them through storytelling and through my own personal experience, then that is giving way to more layered conversations around, okay, so this is why it's really important to have a public bus be universally designed. This is why it's really important for a TV station to have sign language interpretation, et cetera, et cetera.
And what does success look like for you? Let's fast forward to the end of your term in 4 years' time. What would you like to be sort of known for in terms of the dial you've been able to shift in understanding of disability in Kenya?
I would say that success for me at the end of this term would look like freedom. So freedom in terms of persons with disabilities are seen more in society, that we are heard more in society, that we are considered more in development plans and projects and strategies. It would also look like members of parliament who may come back for another term, who may be re-elected or wherever they go after these 4 years, that they continue to be sensitive or have some sort of foresight in terms of, hey, I remember working really closely with a senator called Asige, and these are the things that she taught us personally and also on the floor of the House, and I'm going to take that forward with me, whatever it is I'm going to do. Success to me would look like, having these bills ascend into law. That would be fantastic. If I could just do that, I'd be like, okay, great, I'm ready to retire. It would also look like just a general public having a better understanding of life should be for everyone, no matter their ability or disability. There shouldn't just be like certain pockets which are for certain people, because actually persons with disabilities really do add a lot of spice and texture and color to life. There are lots of inventions or creations that have been inspired by disability, like texting. Texting was actually invented because of trying to look for a solution for deaf people who are trying to communicate on the phone. And now everyone texts, like it's the be all and end all.
I don't think anyone calls each other anymore, do they?
Exactly. No one really likes calling, correct. I also know that the electric toothbrush was also invented because of a man who saw his wife having reduced motor skills in her hands and wrists. And so that was created, and now everybody has an electric toothbrush. Things like this, like, hey, when you actually look at and interact with people who look at things or who go through things differently, they're actually doing it quite creatively. I'm having to live my life in a very creative way in order to just be at the same level as you. And so how about you listen to my perspective and you realize, there's something there that we could all use and we could all actually benefit from. So those are the kinds of things that it might not take 4 years alone. It might take the rest of my life, but it would be nice if one way or the other something changes.
Well, there are no greater problem solvers than people who have problems to solve, and
absolutely. Sometimes I tell my cousin, like, when I'm in a moment of like, exhaustion, I'm really tired. I didn't want to have this burden on my life. Like, why did God or the universe give me all this to do? I just want to rest. And she goes, in 2 weeks' time, Crystal, you'll be so bored. You'll be like, right, what's next? You'll be calling people like, hey, what can I do? Where can I fit in? How can I help? So, yeah.
I do want to talk a little bit about your music, and I think it's brilliant that you've said that, regardless of what's going on, you carve this time out each week to be in the studio to continue making and creating. And I think even if people are not politicians, they as they get older, there's less and less space for that creativity. I know I'm guilty of that, and I know many others. So I think it's brilliant that you've got that discipline. So where do your ideas for your music come from, and is the audience for your music the kind of same that tune into you and you're doing public speaking or speaking politics, or is it a very different kind of side of you that connects in a different way to people?
Nina Simone says artists and creatives should reflect the times. And so through my music, I try as best as I can to sort of stamp the moment that I'm in through my music, my lyrics, the feel, the texture, the tone of what I'm putting out there, I think is my goal. So as much as I can't really, well, maybe I can actually, perhaps I can write a song which is about point of order, Mr. Speaker. Da, 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 da. Maybe I could, I don't know. But if not that directly, then yeah, for sure, I would like to be able to, which I am trying to do now. I'm in studio at the moment. I'll actually be going to a session later today where I'm trying to write and, tell stories about my experiences right now and how either similar or different they are from what I believed the world to be like or should be like, etc. Just telling stories in an entertaining way. I also have this other outlet, which is some short vlogs, and they used to be called Blind Girl Manenos. Manenos is a Swahili word which basically means like stuff. So blind girl stuff. So whatever that means, how do I now clean clothes? How do I now cook? How do I now go shopping? How do I now, now that I have a disability? But I want to change that to visually impaired parliamentarian, aka VIP. So I want to figure out how I can now film short vlogs, VIP, what's it like to be a VIP now, and things like that. But all in all, the inspiration will come from everywhere, and I hope that it continues coming from everywhere. I remember being at the One Young World Summit last year, 2022, where actually is where I found out that I was a senator. I was sitting, I remember, in a session, and Caroline Casey, who is another, fantastic advocate for disability rights, was speaking. And I was sat next to my buddy. One Young World organized me to have someone to, of course, guide me like a sighted guide. So my buddy, her name was Jackie. And together we're called Cracky because Crystal and Jackie together. Anyway, so Cracky was sat in the moment that I found that I was a senator. My phone kept buzzing in my pocket and I was like, why are people texting me? Who's tagging me and stuff? And then I pulled up my phone after that session and I realized what people were saying. I've been gazetted, at home. And emotions were high. I remember Caroline Casey came off the stage and she was like, why are you crying? And I was just like, oh my God, I just found out that I've become a senator. And it was just, I don't know, I can't really explain the moment, but it's things like those that I would like to see how to put into music or to put into vlogs or to tell the story about, because that's what makes life, these moments are what make life, not really the huge, writing a bill is great, but the story around writing the bill, the reasons why the bill is important, how it's going to change people's lives every day, minute to minute, that's, I think, what will connect with human beings for decades, centuries to come. So, and they might not remember my name, but I hope that they remember what I was trying to put out into the world, and I hope the energy is apparent in anything that I do creatively. I don't know if that really answers the question, or if I just went off.
Yeah, more than answers it. Brilliant articulation, and it feels like that's a good point to and a really inspiring point to close. So, Crystal Asige, thank you so much for being on the Possibility Club.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Possibility Club Practical Bravery. If you enjoyed this episode, do like, share, review, tell everybody about it. Look in the show notes for all the details of today's guest, stuff we talked about, stuff that's of interest, new things to read, new things to listen to. And if you are running a business or a charity and you are trying to accelerate or improve the impact that you have in the world, if you want to be famous for what you do and what you change rather than just what you sell, then talk to us. alwayspossible.co.uk. We want to hear from you, we want to talk to you, we want to amplify and elevate your ideas, and who knows, we might be able to help you feel more confident and clear about what's next. alwayspossible.co.uk. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new special guest and a new insight on practical bravery in action.
The Possibility Club is an Always Possible podcast. The interviewer was Richard Freeman for Always Possible, and the producer and editor was me, Crystal Tracy, for Lo-Fi Arts. Have a good week.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
Lo-Fi